quarantine day 195 or whatever.
As much as I hate to do this, take a second if you would and think back to the 2016 election cycle. If you can think past this,
I'm just chilling in Cedar Rapids,
and this,
please clap.
you can probably remember a handful of times when Donald Trump mentioned coal miners. They became one of his favorite rhetorical props, representative of the disenchanted everyman that he claimed to speak for. In Trump's narrative, the miner was a victim of government's dastardly plot to regulate business, a struggling American worker sacrificed on the altar of the Go Green liberal establishment. With the help of some, weird crowd-pleasing gags, Trump managed to do pretty well in coal country. He ended up winning 4 out of the 5 top coal-producing states, all the while pushing this idea that safety and environmental regulations were driving the decline of the coal industry. During Trump's 3rd month in office, he invited a group of coal miners and coal industry executives to pose behind him while he signed Executive Order 13783. This order mandated the immediate review of all agency actions that potentially burden the safe, efficient development of domestic energy resources. In normal speak, this essentially meant, what regulations can we slash to get coal out of the ground faster? The insinuation of this photo op was clearly supposed to be that deregulation would be good for both energy execs and coal miners. But if we look back less than 100 years, we'll find that West Virginia coal miners once fought not 1, but 2 literal wars. I'm talking wars with guns and cannons and stuff, over basic health and safety on the job. These weren't anything like the metaphorical war on coal that Trump loves to bemoan. The West Virginia mine wars of 1912 through 1921 involved bloody armed battles between workers, government troops, and private guards hired by the mining companies. Against this historical backdrop, in which miners literally died and killed for safety regulations, Trump's peddling of deregulation to miners seems downright sinister. This will be my first in a series of videos about the West Virginia mine wars, a topic so big and action-packed that it will probably need 3, if not 4, separate installments. Before I dive into the conflicts themselves, I want to take a look at what the conditions in mines were like before there was any union power, let alone safety regulations. Coal mining in West Virginia, arguably the state's biggest claim to fame other than the song Country Road, really took off in the latter half of the 19th century. The explosion of industrial production in the Northeast required constant power, and West Virginia emerged as one giant energy resource pool. With the extension of the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway into West Virginia in 1877, a barrage of new mining companies began to spring up everywhere, eager to capitalize on the booming market for coal. By the 1890s, the vast majority of these new coal companies were owned by absentee investors in big cities like New York and Boston. This means that those who actually worked the mines were producing wealth that would largely not be reinvested back into their own communities. As a result, the company towns where the miners lived were notorious for extremely poor infrastructure, including slum-like living conditions. I want to pause on company towns for a second because they're an extremely important element to this story. So in a company town, all of the houses, businesses, churches, schools, everything were owned by the same private company, giving that company near total material, ideological, and political control. And for bosses, this model was awesome. It meant that basically all the wages that they paid out to workers would eventually come circling back to the company through rent payments, grocery bills, all that kind of stuff. They could also appoint all of their own town officials, things like sheriffs, school board members, even preachers and school teachers, so that nobody espousing subversive ideas could gain much of an ideological foothold over the workers. There's so much more I could say about company towns, including how bosses spatially organized them along ethnic and religious lines to make sure that their workers didn't become too much of a unified force. But to keep us moving along, I'll just say that these were usually terrible places for workers to live. They were haphazardly thrown together with little regard for health or safety. Close proximity to the mines made air and water pollution rampant, and because a worker rented his house from the same guy who signed his paychecks, complaining about bad conditions at work could lead to him not only being fired, but also losing his home and every other aspect of his family's life. Conditions in the mines themselves were even more hazardous. Miners frequently died of suffocation by coal dust or gases, fires and explosions, and mine shaft or tunnel collapses. West Virginia had the weakest mine safety laws in the entire country, and the few laws that were on the books included major loopholes that would let companies get out of taking responsibility for workers' injuries or accidents. When disasters inevitably occurred in the mines, West Virginia's elected officials routinely just turned their heads, not wanting to incur the wrath of the powerful coal companies. When 46 West Virginia miners were killed in the Red Ash mine explosion in 1900, West Virginia's governor claimed, "It is but the natural course of mining events that men should be injured or killed by accidents." Such blasé attitudes become even more reprehensible when we consider that children as young as 10 or 11 often worked in the mines. Screw you, mustache governor. So for this incredibly dangerous work, West Virginia miners were paid about 50 cents per ton of coal that they were able to haul. A real strong, buff miner in peak physical condition could maybe haul a maximum of 4 tons of coal per day. But since good health and a strong body were hard to maintain in this environment, most miners could really only haul about 2 or 3, netting about $1 or $1.50 for a day's work. After his rent, grocery bills, and the cost of any tools that he used on the job were subtracted from his monthly pay, the miner had barely anything left to bring home to his family, meaning that it was really hard for them to save up enough to move somewhere else or start a different job. To cope with the harsh reality of their work, miners developed their own informal practices of safety and mutuality. These included things like older, more experienced miners mentoring the younger, less experienced ones, and an understanding that if a disaster happened, everyone would pitch in to help the wounded or the dying. With their neglect and their disregard for their workers, coal companies essentially forced miners to develop the self-organizing skills they would use to form a powerful union, the United Mine Workers of America, in the year 1890. In my episode next week, I'll take you through the United Mine Workers' early organizing efforts in West Virginia and how these led to the first mine war in 1912. In the meantime, if you could use some homework, I recommend checking out this book, The Devil is Here in These Hills, West Virginia's Coal Miners and Their Battle for Freedom by James Green. It was my main source for this video and all of the coming ones about the mine wars. And if you've been in more of a TV mood recently, I recommend checking out the PBS documentary, The Mine Wars. It's available for free on PBS's website, and I'll link to it below. Until next week, drink some water, get some rest, and discuss Marxian theory with your cat long into the night.
Peach, do you like dialectics? I think you do.